Hello there, this is an A-level resource video to help all of you guys who are just starting out your A-level photography units. You're probably in year 13 maybe, or you might be a year 12 starting off a brand new unit from new. Now whenever you do this, it's always good to make sure that you look at really good examples of other students' work, and if you can do that in school or have a look on YouTube, it really helps out. If you want to, you can check all of my other vids where there's also some other A-level photography units, and also if you want to check out my work, that's just that little Behance address at the top there. What I'm going to do is in this video I'm going to have a look at some of my students' examples in reference to a unit that was suggested for me to do for a video based on claustrophobia. So hopefully this will help give you a few pointers for your unit and hopefully give you a bit of help for when you're doing your own stuff in your A-level next year. Now, the most important thing to remember is pick an open subject. The subject I've been asked to investigate, which is claustrophobia, might cause a few problems in the early stages because it's a little bit closed. So try and pick something that's open, or like it just says here, you know, on the number 2 point there, just don't be afraid of changing your investigation as you progress. Just make sure you explain your intentions and what you're doing. A-level means advanced level, and that might sound like the most stupidest thing to say for a video, but I put that in there just to basically show you that you need to be thinking about an advanced response. It's not enough to do in AS, it's not enough to do in A-level what you've just done at AS. You have to find the advanced way of responding and developing your ideas. Just in this little image here, this is just an example of like a thought pathway that I show to my guys. The blue bit there on the left is what I generally expect from people from their AS year, generally in like sort of year 12, and then when it gets to A-level, so you're coming to the end of your AS or maybe year 12, heading into year 13, I'm then going to be expecting people to be thinking about how you are going to advance your idea on, not just taking a new set. What are you going to do to refine that idea? Because that is the thing which will be important for getting your AO2 marks for refining and basically developing your idea onwards. This little thought path, sort of like thought path here, shows you the red bit on the right hand side there, where a student originally projected onto a model and then presented the correct images and what they wanted to take forward, but then they didn't do anything else. But if they would have looked at other projection artists and understood and analysed and then retook a set, that would have showed refinement. Or they could have pushed the idea and maybe used other lighting in combination with that, or costumes, or something where they developed that idea onwards, maybe using their own ideas to project instead of stock or other images. These are all things that you could try. Just going back to that list a sec, obviously do plan out what you're going to do, but don't have a mental breakdown if you get halfway through and you're not sticking to the plan. New things will happen, tangents happen, the examiners love it, alright, so just go with it. The next part is your assessment objectives. Just know what they are. They're not actually that complicated. You've just got to make sure that you reduce the wording into something that you can understand. You might want to have a look at my two things here that just hope that I pass on to my students. This is what I then show to them to get them and to basically develop their own understanding of assessment. The most thing that you need to sort of bear in mind is what do you need to do for each assessment objective, and don't do anything that there's no point in doing, because you're going to have enough to do as it is, making sure that you're either being sort of like confident and up to an exceptional level in your photography response. My guys at the moment, they are starting off in a really straightforward standard way where they are planning out ideas, doing mind maps, spider maps, whatever you want to call them, and they are going to be the first things in their book, which are then followed by written intentions. This just shows you what I want my guys to write about in their written response. These other images that are flashing by are just examples of student mind maps. Those mind maps are from different units, whether it's an exam unit or whether it's something personal they've picked, and it's just knowing the difference then between, you know, having a good one or having a great one. And the main thing is showing that you are capable of understanding what you're doing. You're not just stabbing in the dark and hoping for the best. This one here is quite a complex plan. That was all based around paper manipulation and how to basically distort things without using too much Photoshop. And it was a great idea, great plan, but it's quite complex. So it's sometimes a good idea if you simplify things down a little bit as well, just so whenever the person who's marking your work looks at it, they can understand what you're talking about. You don't have to do all your stuff on PowerPoint. You're quite entitled to write out your plans and draw your plans. There's no better or worse way to do it. Find a way that works for you and stick with it. This one here, which is just called it like the daddy of a mind map. This was a hand-drawn example of a mind map. It's actually done on A1 size. It was a real big one. But this shows all the ideas that could have been investigated. Not all of them were selected by the end of the investigation, but it shows that understanding and ability to generate ideas, which is absolutely important for AO1. So it's really crucial you generate those ideas. And one of the things I put here, which I've really come to value, is get a load of people together and see what they think of your idea. And this little image here just shows one of the students from one of my groups, which I did a couple of weeks ago. And what happened was we all sit round, they talk about their idea, they maybe share images on PowerPoint or maybe not. And then once they've done that, other students pitch in with examples, with ideas, even if it's a couple of words, just something straightforward, and then they write it on a post-it note. That can be referred to later on, but it's also incredibly useful for generating ideas in the early planning stages when you're still quite open to new ideas. So I definitely recommend you do this, guys. This bit here about drawing, you might think, what's he talking about here? It's photography video, but drawing's an important part of the new AQA assessment criteria, and the best way to involve it is using the drawing to show your understanding and planning of ideas. That can be in diagrams or annotations, anything like that, but sometimes it pays to have an idea for what you're going to do with your drawing. Okay, moving on, this slide here, this is a plan from that I did with a student from one of my groups based on the natural world. Now, that particular student had a very fixed idea about what he was going to do. He wanted to make star trails, take really good pictures of natural wildlife, and then start to mix them together. If it wouldn't have been for a bit of cheeky peer assessing, we wouldn't have come to an absolutely amazing idea that was put forward by one of my students, which was that if he was going to be creating his own images of birds and going in bird hides and trying to photograph the best natural wildlife that he could do, why doesn't he think about making his own bird hide or involving that possibly in the work he was making? He could then later on create his own camouflage suit out of his own images, which could be then an opportunity to then photograph within a studio setting, or be a totally unusual development for his work and a massive contrast to the straightforward, more naturalistic shots he was intending to take. Something else which can be very, very good at this point as well, just flashing here on the slide there, sometimes when you're generating ideas, it's not going to kill you if you get stock images off the internet or do a bit of cheeky googling just to experiment with creating the kind of images that you want, or just seeing what those images look like together. This bit here on the right hand side, when we were talking about making plans, what we did was we got images of birds, images of landscapes, and then we just simply put them together. That can be put into your actual workbook as long as you say you use these as stock images. Then if you then go and take those images and develop them in the same style with your images, that's the best things you can do, just to show your intentions at the beginning and how they're then realised at the end. Moving away from this natural idea now, just looking at things that you need to do before you start. Now, I'm not going to start crying about Pinterest or Behance, but they literally are one of the greatest sites that you can go to and visit. It doesn't matter whether you're a photographer, artist, craftsperson, it doesn't matter. They are really sophisticated, really user-friendly, and incredibly useful for all my students. And if my students don't use it, I tend to have a bit of a strap on with them because of that. So Behance, Pinterest, get yourself on there, get an account, and start putting your ideas together. Now going on to the main reason with the video, which was about a request on what could I do for claustrophobia. Well, the best thing to do is, first and foremost, like I said, Pinterest, Behance, get on there and get stuck in. My first worry was, apart from it being quite a closed project, was the fact that I was concerned about it being a closed project, and there are going to be lots of cliche responses that can be made to claustrophobia, and the examiner will have seen a lot of responses to this in the past, and maybe sort of a little bit of prejudice creeps in there because it's been something that's done a lot of times before. In the same way that if you ever see projects on pollution, you expect to see your token cigarettes on the sidewalk, in the drains and in rubbish piles, that sort of stuff. So be really mindful of being cliche. It's about what you do to make it personal and individual to you. This next slide here, that's just about being careful not to copy other people's work, especially if that work is a little bit poor and it's not really had much thought involved in it. This image here on the screen, it's a very, very obvious image, and it's always a good idea with any photograph that you don't just give the viewer everything they need to understand it. It helps if they've got a little bit of work to do and they've got a bit of a challenge. By having a couple of hands on the screen and the word claustrophobia, it doesn't just mean the image is about claustrophobia, and that can be a bit boring. Maybe not so subtle as this one here, Wes Naiman, who sellotapes the faces of his models and constricts and sort of constrains them into sort of really bizarre and contorted shapes. Maybe not sort of immediately obvious for claustrophobia, but at the same time it could create some unusual, uncomfortable positions for people to be in, and then you can photograph the responses. If you were looking to go down something more specific, you might want to have a look at the work of Marcus Hauser. He's someone who then looks at claustrophobia and then also looks at sort of like confinement and restriction. These were a few images from a photographer who was looking at themes of overcrowding, and this is a little bit extreme, and you don't have to bend and contort yourself or your model into these sorts of spaces, but maybe it could lead to something. I think the thing which appealed to me was the square format, the fact that it was like, you know, cropped to that sort of square, that just made it quite interesting and sort of uncomfortable for the viewer to look at. The little image underneath here was made by one of my students a few years back, which was photoshopping people into enclosed environments, and some of those were as small as film canisters, or they were in this case like cardboard boxes that had just been masking taped together and then were laid together. This next image here is a little bit more sort of obvious what's going on, but again, if you don't want to go down that route of like sort of having confinement, you need to find something else which will reference that claustrophobia for you. But be aware and open to inspiration from unusual places. Now, not everyone's going to be into the Chili Peppers, but I do quite like a bit of that myself. And in particular, just from looking at, just on the internet, specifically looking for that image of the wall in the bottom right there, which I thought might be quite an interesting theme to investigate for claustrophobia. But then at the same time, everything from the wheelie bins in the top left there to the fact that he looks like he's in a weird hooded tent. These could be things which you could throw into your investigation to show your ability to look at more people than just photographers. Look at artists, be influenced by books, be influenced by film. Don't just look at photographers. Even down to the fisheye lens there in the top right. Think about how you could take photographs with different lenses to show off that claustrophobia through an isolation of model instead. This next couple of slides here is just showing different responses to claustrophobia, possibly, or in this case more like the fear of isolation. This artist here, Lucinda Chua, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but I do like the work an awful lot. Really good situational portrait photographer, excellent lighting, brilliant quality, lots of mood and atmosphere in the work that they are creating. Really love it. Now, these are a bit more subtle, but this next one here, a little bit more obvious. But sometimes being obvious and having that literal quality to the work can create something really interesting. Now, obviously, claustrophobia and raw chicken don't really have a lot to do with each other, but in this case, it's just the idea. So just be thinking about sometimes literally doing things can have as much reward as doing things in a subtle way. This next image here is just showing how that sometimes don't just use a camera. You might use your phone. You might use scanners. They can give you a different type of result, and they just show your ability and ideas for experimentation. This next slide is just to say, think about your location. It really is essential that you don't just stick to the same place doing the same thing. You might not be as lucky as this guy here, Andrew Brooks's work, who manages to get into sewer and waste systems and lots of abandoned buildings that are most of the time in darkness. These ones here from Katherine Mitchell, using photographs as the actual piece to then rephotograph. So then the photos become part of an installation themselves, or it could be that the photos of people are then put inside boxes. Could be a really good way to develop that idea of claustrophobia there. Other ideas, and these should definitely not be overlooked by any photographer just because they're not straight photographs, but sometimes video or animation shorts can be really good. I'll put a little cheeky one just flying over the screen in a second there. It can be really good either to develop in sort of basically with any sort of flat images or single images that you've got, or with actual video themselves. It could be really good to develop your ideas in that that way. Projection as well. Think about projecting images onto other things, maybe into confined spaces, into box, anything like that. Or you could make more complex installations, smaller spaces, not quite Red Hot Chili Pepper style, but maybe like this one here that was a paper construction that was made to be like a little igloo, I suppose. I'm not quite sure, but that could maybe be an interesting thing to develop for any ideas based on claustrophobia. This next slide here, it just basically highlighting the importance that you need to find an artist that works for you. You need to find someone that you feel that you can connect with and that you can then base developments from. This one was from an exam question from this year based around sort of issues and concerns, and this work here, which is just on the following slide here, just shows the connection to the artist's work. Lauren E. Simonotti, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong as well, and what they did was they created their own sort of like tense, sort of like really atmospheric images using the darkroom that we have to stage a similar sort of set to what the artist would have had when she originally took those photographs there. But then it's then what you can then do to push that idea further. The student decided to sort of like really increase the amount of black space and use that sort of like blackness to create focus and intrigue for the viewer. At the same time, they took the idea and they further by trying to cellulose thinner and layer her medical instructions to do with anxiety relief, just to push that idea a little bit further. So sometimes think about what could you layer into images that isn't an image. Could it be something information based? Think about the word itself. That's really, really key. This next slide here, think how you could do things simply. All I did here was I just cut some bits in a cardboard box, just showing possibly like an entrance or an opening into an enclosed environment. Could be quite a confined space to reference that idea of claustrophobia, and then you could simply Photoshop your images inside it. This student here photoshops themselves into a cage they've made out of basically some chicken wire. Just a little break from claustrophobia just to show you this. This is some student work on fibromyalgia, so not quite a phobia, more of a syndrome. So I'm just showing an example of where a student has used their arts-based skills here, which is namely painting, and they then, to represent the fibromyalgia, which is basically muscle pain syndrome, as you'll probably see from these images here. And then she then painted musculature and ligaments and soft tissue onto the model she was photographing. Moving on from this, just to say, please make sure you think about varying what you do. Don't just use the same settings. Vary the shutter speed, see what you can do. Maybe think about using tilt shift, a different approach. So look at the technical side, not just taking the photographs. And think about using lenses. I don't want to imagine a world without prime lenses, so I'd much rather not imagine that horrible, horrific world. Even if you just have a cheeky play around with a 50mm lens. Especially in darker lit conditions, prime lenses are the absolute daddy. As well as the photographs, you might think about, when you're printing, doing something creative with those images, not just fixing them down and having them as the outcome, but you might use relief surfaces. Those relief surfaces could then form something really interesting as a method of development. This image here on the screen is just showing how basically two conflicting actions have been put together. One person shouting and the other person which is bound inside the actual image. A bit like Imageception, if that makes any sense. I'm not sure, I've been talking for 23 minutes. I better stop soon. Yes, I will. These last couple of slides here that are just to help you with the claustrophobia there. Think about stories. It doesn't just have to be from your local area, but that can be quite interesting. How claustrophobia could relate. Anything to do with mining, caving. Can you think of where anyone's been trapped, and could you use that in your work to give you a little bit of location relevance to your work? Could it be something emotive, where you think about something that has been confined, or something that is kept in a claustrophobic environment, like a locket or a brooch, and maybe that could be something which could then be used to develop the work even further. Like my students developed images by putting them into cages, you might be putting them into brooches. I don't know. You might look at something a bit more international, like the Chilean mining incident from about a year back or so. That was very, very high profile. Maybe that could be something that you could investigate. Or you might decide to do the opposite. Maybe combine images of claustrophobia with agoraphobia, or agoraphobia, if that's how you pronounce it. And it could be interesting to put the two together. And just to wrap up this, before I just give you a few quick pointers for general sets of photography. In the claustrophobia on your first sets, this little thing on the screen here could be an idea for how to start off. but that's exactly what it is. Starting off simply with a cling film, maybe the elastic bands, like that previous artist that I showed you there, and then maybe confined spaces images. But all of those ideas could then be mixed together. Or, like it says in point number 5 there, you could target more advanced ways to refine your idea besides repeating and combining first sets. Either way, you've got an option there of how to start. And these last few slides, they are just showing really good examples of format to stick to, where it's like this book page here, which is an example of an A3 sketchbook, which is just opened to reveal the 2 pages that shows a set of images, a few developments, an artist connection, and some simple developments. It's a really clean-cut, good format to stick to, and whatever the format is you pick, make sure you keep it regular so the examiner knows what they are to expect. Obviously drop the odd shock in there occasionally, but keep something that they can basically easily assess. And this one here is just a few ideas for how to write about images. Maybe that might help. And the last slide there is how to fill space and what to look for when you're going through your work. This final one here is just called just like a 5 R's checklist, and this is something that I get my students to check their work against every single time they get so far, or whether it's an assessment, so they go back and make sure that they have bled the set dry or the development dry from whatever it can be. Okay, right, that's about 26 minutes of your life you might never get back if you've survived this long in the video. I hope it's been helpful to all those new A-level guys out there starting their unit, and I'm now going to get hopefully a drink of water because I feel like I'm going to dehydrate. Any more questions or requests, please email me through the channel. All the best, good luck with your A-level guys, toodles!